Welcome to another episode of No Free Lunch. Today we get into the subject of class envy, the problem of economics. The subject of covetousness goes back to the days of the Hebrew Bible and unfortunately stick with us today with profound implications for how we view the economy and how we view our fellow mankind. I want to unpack covetousness not only for what it does wrong economically, but ultimately how corrosive it is spiritually. The 10th commandment says, "Thou shalt not covet," and I believe it is no accident that the 10th commandment is the final commandment. We have this instruction for ethical living that concludes with how we do not want to go through life envious of what other people have. But see, I think there is so much more going on than just the ethical principle of not constantly wishing you had things you don't have. It is the principle of being productive, of going out and getting the things you want to have through your own work and determination. Covetousness does two things wrong. It first gets the pronouns wrong. This is supposedly a big controversy today about pronouns. Here's a real big mistake with pronouns. Instead of a focus on my production, it's a focus on someone else's, his or her consumption. So the pronoun is wrong when we get the focus off of ourselves and onto others, but then the target of this is wrong when the focus goes from production to consumption. We're so worried about the lifestyles other people may be living that we're not as focused on our own productive behavior. Ultimately, this is, of course, an economic problem when you focus on another person's consumption rather than your own production, but it is spiritually corrosive. It leads to a state of envy, a resentment, a jealousy, and a bitterness that is simply unhealthy. What we need today is a restoration of economic thought, personal thought, and growth-oriented economics that is devoid of class envy. Class envy, covetousness corrode good economics. There's two major points I want to make about where class envy comes from and how it ends up being relevant when we think about economic theory and economic policy. We are living in a time that is obsessed with the problem of wealth inequality, of income inequality. But I say problem probably with air quotes around it. And it's not because I don't take seriously the potential for social divide or for even policies that perhaps are unfair in how we get to wealth inequality or income inequality. To the extent those things are happening because of cronyism or there being some sort of unfair advantage to one party over another, I'd take exception to it as well. But the mere existence of an inequality in wealth between one part of society and another part is no more problematic than nature itself, because this is, in fact, totally unavoidable. I make the argument often that if we were to just hit a reset button and divide all of the wealth in the world equally by each member of the population, take all the real estate and cash and business ownership and assets and just divide it up evenly, divided by the 7 or 8 billion people on planet Earth, that 5 minutes after we got done, there would be more wealth inequality. That just inevitably, because of different decisions, different tastes and preferences and attitudes and behaviors, the activities, this human action would inevitably lead to a sort of divergent direction and a total diversification of where people went with their own assets, their ability to generate income, and so forth. I also believe we have to understand that some wealth is created because some people are acting more productively than others. Some wealth inequality comes from the fact that some people chose an avenue that the marketplace has put a lower premium on. People might pay less for a certain product or service than they will pay for another, and that subjective theory of value can no more be manipulated to change wealth than we can impact our weight just by messing around with our scale. It doesn't make any sense. I do believe that we need to address where wealth inequality as a problem actually comes from, which fundamentally is A, inadequate growth, where not all people are feeling an actual advancement, and then B, covetousness, this class envy as the problem of economics. We really do not historically have big controversies around wealth inequality or income inequality when everyone is doing better. And yet in any period where all people are doing better, there are those who are doing more better than others. But when the rich are getting richer at a faster pace than the poor are getting richer, the poor generally don't care as they themselves are experiencing a higher quality of life. And what we ought to do to remedy concerns of wealth and income inequality is have a fully advancing, growth-oriented, prosperous economy where everybody, even if at a different pace, is able to participate in the potential growth and advancement of society. Historically, where I believe we got to this point that has culminated in such an ideology of covetousness, of resentment, this belief that society is essentially a byproduct of an oppressed and an oppressor, is primarily rooted in the Marxist thought of the 19th century. And yet Karl Marx did not start off saying, I believe in class envy, and then create an ideology that led to totalitarianism and communism. What class envy is the result of Marxist thought and philosophy. He started off believing that it was fundamentally dehumanizing for mankind to be in a war against nature where his work is separated from him by the capitalist, by the entrepreneur. That because the entrepreneur is getting the labor of the worker and that there is value from that is being split to the entrepreneur and then wages to the laborer, that it dehumanizes the laborer. Marx started with the premise that there's something dehumanizing about work, which of course is totally contrary to the entire Christian theology of production being, in fact, what man was actually made for. That this is the man in his most glorious state because he's in the very nature and character of God, co-creating, laboring as God did to create the world, laboring out of the garden into civilization to create, produce, and sort of enhance the quality and the capability of the creation itself. This is a very dignifying concept that Marx saw as dehumanizing. So it was inevitable that it would lead to a place of utter class struggle, utter class resentment. And ultimately, Marx's historic materialism led him to believe that the proletariat would end up revolting and there would be not only this constant struggle between labor and capital, but eventually the labor would overthrow the entrepreneur. Marx was wrong in the premises. He was wrong, obviously, in the historical prophecy, but Marx was wrong in what he was prescribing as a solution. The notion of class struggle is fundamentally what is dehumanizing because it takes the focus off of one person's own contribution to society. It takes the focus off of truth, beauty, and goodness. It takes the focus entirely off of productive capacity, a creative outlet, reaping what we sow, all of these really wonderful concepts that have done so much to advance the plight of mankind, and it puts the focus on a resentment of another actor. Now, in this reality, and particularly in some of the conditions that existed in the 19th century, there was mistreatment of workers. There are issues that we do not want to see. We don't want exploitation. We don't want cruelty. But what is our solution? To create an environment that brings quality of life down for everybody, or to focus on how quality of life must be allowed to come up to bring people out of poverty, not into a state of universal poverty, whether that be impoverishment of the entrepreneur or impoverishment of the entire soul of society, which is absolutely what communism and totalitarianism did in the 20th century. But I think we have to understand economically, and we've seen this play out so abundantly over the last 75 years in American economic life. Once you have an ideology of covetousness, people do not stop at just merely wanting what someone else has. Then they have to go about developing a policy framework for how they can get it. It doesn't stop with coveting what they have. It turns into how can I go about getting more of these things. And we see all types of really ill-begotten policy ideas that come from the basic idea of class envy. They come from the basic idea of covetousness, a rank violation of the 10th commandment. Well, my next guest on No Free Lunch doesn't really need an introduction. You know him as an incredibly popular talk show host, podcast, author, public figure who, unlike many public figures on the right, has been incredibly influential in intellectually moving the needle in how we think about some of the very things we're talking about on this show, matters of ethics, matters of economics. And I believe that Dennis Prager is one of the great thought leaders in our society who has an audience, has a microphone, and most importantly, has a mind and a heart to help inform us on these subjects. And I'm very blessed to welcome Dennis Prager to No Free Lunch.
What an introduction. I got to come on more often.
Yes, it was all off the top of my head. I meant every word.
No, I'm very touched. I thank you.
Dennis, we're talking about the subject of class envy as a problem in economics and rooting it around what I believe is the case with covetousness, that 10th commandment of thou shalt not covet. And it seems to me we're living in an environment, when you look at the socioeconomic and socio-political context, Jordan Peterson is right, that the progressive left today seems to hate the rich a lot more than they love the poor. What do you think about this?
That actually is something I have been arguing much of my life about every single left-wing ism and movement. Feminists hate men more than they love women. Leftists have no concern for blacks. They just hate the Judeo-Christian capitalist bases of the society. They all speak in the name of a cause for which they have essentially no real interest. Environmentalists are phony in that they don't want nuclear power. That is the giveaway, that they don't give a damn about the environment. They only care about restructuring society. Every leftist movement uses its projected cause as a way of destroying what exists. The envy issue is a very important one. I've done a lot of work on the 10 Commandments in my Bible commentaries. I believe that, as I put it often, if you really want to defund the police, there is a way. Have everybody observe the 10 Commandments. That's really almost all we need to have a beautiful world. And it's interesting, the 10th commandment, as I point out when I teach the 10 Commandments and in my commentary, is the only commandment, not only in the 10 Commandments, but in the first 5 books where all the laws are, the Torah, that tells you about a sin of thought. There are no sins of thought in the repository of law, which is the first 5 books, the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses, the Torah, whatever term you want to use. Yet here we have one. Coveting is wanting to take away that which belongs to another and take it for yourself. It isn't the same even as envy or jealousy. That's not healthy, but that's not a sin in the 10 Commandments. To covet is to want to take away. So the second 5 commandments: do not steal, do not commit adultery, do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not bear false witness. They are all about stealing. Murder is taking a life, adultery is taking a spouse, stealing is taking property or a human being, kidnapping. False witness is taking away justice. So everything revolves around, I am allowed to keep what I have, and everything on the left wants to take it away. The 10 Commandments and the left are in effect mutually exclusive.
So, do you think that we have a problem with covetousness first individually in the hearts and minds of mankind that then permeates its way into our economic system? Or do we have a problem with covetousness in our economic and political system that comes downstream into people's hearts and minds and thinking?
That's a very thoughtful question. And I would say the latter more than the former. People are taught to be angry. The left teaches people to be angry, to be jealous, and to be, most of all, ungrateful. When I was a kid, and that's a while ago, so it's actually worth noting because America has changed dramatically. When you saw your neighbor who had more, and I lived that perfect life. My father owned an Oldsmobile, and the neighbor owned a Cadillac. And you knew a person's socioeconomic status by the GM car. It went Cadillac, Buick, Oldsmobile, Pontiac, Chevrolet. So we were in the middle. As I always say, I grew up in the middle of the middle class. The guy next to us was in the upper class, got a new Cadillac every year. When I look back, I literally cannot recall a hint of angst, let alone annoyance, that our neighbor got a Cadillac every year. The American idea was, if the guy next to me made his income honorably, obviously, he's not Al Capone. If he made it honorably, then I want to know how I could make that income. The American ideal was, you don't take away from the guy who succeeds, you learn how to succeed. The left doesn't believe that.
And so there's a sense in which the aspirational society was a ideal before, and now it isn't the way we're doing it, it's the very idea of aspiration that has become offensive. And I'm not one who believes that Karl Marx taught us class envy. I think that Karl Marx landed into class envy out of his poorly constructed worldview, filled with deficiencies and an inadequate understanding of the human person, and then ended up with an ideology that was inevitably rooted in class struggle. But we have chosen class envy not because of identity with the political philosophy of Karl Marx, but rather because it feels better to resent our neighbor. To your analogy, I'd rather be mad at his Cadillac than think about my own lot in life. And this takes away from our own agency, our own responsibility, and most importantly, our own dignity, because we have this ability to go produce and do something, and yet it seems impossible to do while we're rooted in this worldview thinking. Where do you think Karl Marx fits into our current class envy? Is he a supplemental actor, or is he perhaps responsible for a bigger role than I'm giving him credit for?
Well, they're both true. People are taught by their society, by their parents, by their schools, once upon a time by their pastor or priest or rabbi. They're given a set of values. The American value system was not built on envy, but you're entirely right that that's built into the human condition. Marx was tapping into it. My contention is that leftism taps into human nature much more than American values do. Liberty, in God we trust, e pluribus unum. That's the American value system as I understand it. I call the American Trinity. For example, people do not yearn to be free. Freedom is a value, not an instinct. This is very rarely noted. It's a big theme in my life. People do not yearn to be free. They yearn to be taken care of. The left, from Marx to the present, so I agree with you, taps into human nature. And human nature does not care that much about freedom. It cares about being taken care of. And the left makes this Faustian deal with people. You support us, you give us your soul, we'll give you goodies. And people will trade their soul for goodies in most cases. It's been very sad for me to see how this works even in America, where we did not believe goodies was more important than liberty. But I have come to understand that this poison has spread to too many of my fellow Americans. Give me free tuition, give me free health care, give me free lunch, give me free even basic income, and take anything you want from me. I'm okay being a peg in the machinery of the state. So you're right. I mean, Marx appeals to human nature.
Yeah, it seems you bring up an interesting point about people's anger, and I think of the way that people respond to people like yourself or our friend Ben Shapiro when you go to college campuses. There are people I vehemently disagree with that speak at college campuses every day. Most of them are professors in the employment of those college campuses. I've never found the time to get angry about it. I've certainly never found the time to go protest against it. And people getting angry about you speaking, to me, suggest not that they're offended by what you have to say, but that they're offended by perhaps that they don't want it being heard, that they're afraid of something in the message. And I'm reminded, you may not recall, I had you in Newport Beach once debating Christopher Hitchens about the existence of God. And I always felt this radical atheism said something more about the atheist, how much they disliked God, than that they disbelieved in God. They were just so angry. Is there something about our beliefs that their response to them should give us a little glimmer of hope, that perhaps they see there is truth and beauty and goodness in what we're promoting, and that we just merely need to wait them out and see the truth prevail over their argument?
Well, as I said, I divide the left of center into liberals and leftists. Liberals share nothing with leftists except that they vote Democrat and that they both believe that the right is the threat. And on that basis, the liberal votes for the people who hate liberal values, which are leftists. We conservatives are actually the ones that keep liberal values alive, like free speech. So I think that there's a way to get to the liberal. I don't think there's a way to get to the leftist. It's very, very difficult, because anyone who is religious understands how difficult it would be to convince them that their religion is in error. I mean, I'm a religious Jew, and I can't even conceive of somebody convincing me that the Bible is nonsense. All your Jewish beliefs are ridiculous. Give up the Sabbath, it's a farce. It's inconceivable. We need to understand that the post-Christian world is not irreligious. They have simply adopted secular religions to fill the hole with the demise of Christianity. That's what leftism is. Leftism is secular religion. For the liberal, it's not quite as strong, and they are reachable, I think. And that's why the work that people like you do, and I do, and we do at PragerU and Talk Radio is so important. The proof, by the way, that we can get to them is that they never debate us. This is an extremely significant point that's rarely made. I would have any New York Times, any left-wing New York Times columnist, which is 99% of them, on my show. And I treat everybody with respect. I've had a handful of major leftists, most never come on, and I always treated them with respect. But they wouldn't. I've offered tens of thousands of dollars to debate any of these left-wing New York Times columnists, to their favorite charity. I would give it to BLM if they wanted, but they never take me up. They never take up Larry's challenge. Larry Elder, my friend, the terrific, brilliant man who ran for governor in California and made a national name for himself. We've been friendly for 35 years, really very close. And I would pay tens of thousands of dollars to Ta-Nehisi Coates or Ibram X. Kendi or the New York Times 1716 group to debate Larry Elder. They never would. In their hearts, they know they can't prevail if there's a level intellectual playground.
Well, I'll bring it back for one final question and allow you to go on with your day. You have traveled the world in your adult life. You've seen all sorts of cultures and societies. And when we wrap up in our discussion of covetousness, I wonder what you see around the globe as it pertains to envy and covetousness that we can learn from here in the United States.
Well, I really do believe that as much as it comports with human nature, which has been your theme, and it's entirely accurate, if it didn't comport with human nature, there wouldn't be a commandment against it. People would think, what does that mean? Do not covet. Not me. Nevertheless, I do believe that it is exponentially exacerbated by the left, or anywhere in the world. That's what it is about. It is resentment that others have. It is more resentment that others have more than me than it is resentment over my own condition. That's what is so remarkable. And the incredibly, I mean, it's so sick that it's almost non-comprehensible, is the role that the ones who have the most play, like the heads of virtually every major corporation, billionaires in many cases, who feed that anger at themselves. I mean, it's a level of pathology. I mean, what are they coveting? They're coveting moral prestige.
Yeah. There's almost sort of some sort of social contract that says, you let me get rich, and then I promise that I'll come back and complain about all the things that you're upset about, and you will still like me and tweet nice things about me and whatnot. It's a really bizarre arrangement.
Bizarre is the word, and it's crushing the greatest experiment in liberty and even equality in human history. It's very painful to watch what the left is doing to the United States of America.
Well, Dennis, thank you for your efforts to fight what the left is doing to the United States of America and to help us create a freer and more virtuous society.
It's my honor.
Covetousness is ultimately a heart issue. It manifests itself in one's own personal thinking, and on a local level, things get said and done and thought that are very unhealthy, unhelpful. Allegedly, their ire is the opulence of a sort of Great Gatsby-like wealth. But fundamentally, it comes down to the old traditional keeping up with the Joneses mentality. It doesn't satisfy anybody. You don't really overcome covetousness when you yourself make more money, and you certainly don't overcome it just by getting someone else to make less money, because it comes down to a heart issue that is not properly focused on one's own productivity, but rather on their relative weighting with others. The only remedy to the class envy problem is daily obedience to the commandment, thou shalt not covet. Eliminating covetousness deals with the class envy problem and enables us to do what Marx got wrong. It enables us to celebrate the worker, to celebrate productivity, not feel sorry for the worker, not believe that the worker is involved in an existential struggle against nature, but rather to see the worker as an image bearer of God who is able to go contribute to society, reap benefits from doing so, and ultimately glory in the achievement of himself and of others, not resent the achievement of others. Class envy remains a problem in economics, and we remedy that problem by following the age-old commandment, thou shalt not covet. Thank you for watching another episode of No Free Lunch.